people want to build hundreds of megawatts. There's a powerhouse data center in the US. It's building an 800 megawatt site. That is not a small feat. That's a significant amount of skills to do that in construction and engineering, not to mention the vendors. They're rubbing their hands going, we've got a big site to support here with the generators and the cabling, not to mention the square feet in Imperial world, or square meters in the metric world of actual white space to put these racks in. How do we do that? How does it work? Many conversations around it, but essentially capacity is key. People want large amounts of demand because the AI is pushing that. Hi, Adam Gibson here from Megaport and techvox. You're watching Data Center Go to Market with Joshua.
Hello there, it's Joshua Feinberg from the Data Center Go to Market podcast, and I'm thrilled to have a very special guest joining me today. I'm welcoming Adam Gibson, who is the Vice President of Global Data Center Development with Megaport and the owner consultant of techvox based in Australia. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Very good morning to you. I mean, it's obviously your afternoon, but hello.
Well, it's great to have you. Actually, what time is there? It's there.
Will be 7 a.m., so bright and early on a Wednesday morning.
That's not too bad. That's kind of what a lot of people would probably consider the acceptable earliest that you would take a breakfast meeting at a conference, right? If you're meeting for someone in the hotel lobby for coffee.
Absolutely, and sometimes there's even the early birds get do the morning runs with some of those events, so they've just about finished up and ready to have a shower and have a quick snack before the back-to-back meetings continue. So 7 a.m. is a acceptable time. Sun's up, everywhere in the world.
Cool. So, Adam, you have a really unique background that brought you into this space. Can you give our audience a little bit of a summary of how you ended up in your current role, heading up data center development for Megaport?
Yeah, so I've spoken about this before, and people have asked me that it's a weird sort of tangent, and something I've learned over the last 10, 15 years is there's no DC university degree. You sort of been in the last little while with most of us, you sort of fall into it in some way, shape, or form, whether you're a previous engineer or something like that. I was fortunate enough to be in an IT space and playing video games, which was a lot different to what it is now with esports and spending it at home. I went to actually events, and someone who owned a facility said, who has the network infrastructure, and it all came together quite nicely over a couple of weekends. So I fell into it as a night technician and moved my way through the industry with different roles and different companies, to then being very lucky enough to have a space in a global position with a company in my hometown.
Yeah, right. That's really fascinating that we're in the mid-2020s now, and there still really isn't very much opportunity for formal higher education in the data center space. It's kind of a patchwork hodgepodge. There's one formal program in Texas that I'm aware of. There's a community college, I think, in North Carolina that's doing a smaller kind of certificate or light degree kind of program. But we're very far off from the place where even just in the major markets, the 5 or 6 major markets in the US, where students can readily access that. So given all of that, when you come across people that are relatively early on in their career, maybe even someone that's still in high school, they're in their mid to late teens, and they're thinking about different career options, perhaps it's a neighbor or a family member or the son or daughter of a coworker, and they've heard a little bit about data centers, especially in the last year or two, given everything that's going on with NVIDIA and AI. And they're curious about what kinds of roles, what kind of career paths they might be able to have, especially if they're less technical and they're leaning more towards things like marketing or product management or channel partnerships or something. What advice would you offer to someone in that scenario?
Yeah, it's something that comes up quite regularly, and I'm a Nomad Futurist ambassador and an Infrastructure Masons founding member in Australia, and that's something that they're very supportive of, is getting new talent and not poaching or acquiring talent from another DC business itself. It's pulling and supporting, as I said, an engineer who's come from the refrigeration or the cooling infrastructure or UPS related to the electrical industry coming together into the DC space. One thing I do is, general books. There's a couple of data center books that are going around now, written by some amazing authors in our industry. That's something that's great to read, and I'll send to Joshua a link to add them into something to do. If you're bored, you can read them at night. There's more and more, interest in staff across the DC sector. So I try and find what you're interested in doing. I guess that's something that's fundamentally important. DC is such a vast word, much like the cloud. They're just a word that means many different things to many different people. But there are some key areas that we need staffing to start the ball rolling. If you look at we'll call it a concierge role, you get them in hotels and things like that. It's the meeting and the greeting. It's the being able to support with simple pieces of, customer service and tickets and things like that. If you don't have experience in the DC industry, not many people do when you first start out. It's nothing that you can jump into, as we just mentioned. So having a background in customer service is key. Sales is amazing because there's a lot of people that are wanting to find key strategic sales partners. We're also going the technical side. So if you've got an IT background, a networking background, it also helps. So having some of those people wanting to expand their horizons and wanting to go, I want to try something different, is perfect for the DC industry. So what I suggest is, when they reach out, what are you interested in doing, or what have you got background in? And there will be a DC role for you, with the amount of construction and operational openings coming up the next sort of 12, 18 months. The industry hasn't been so strong. We keep saying that year on year, it's always the data center industry is growing heavily, and it hasn't stopped. I think that's the thing, is people sort of think that at some point it's going to drop and dip. We're lucky enough that in the last sort of 2 or 3 years, it's been even stronger than it has been on the previous 2 or 3 years. And the demand for AI, the demand for more localized, regionalized, sovereignty-related businesses, not to mention the defense networks that are growing out to support more of their digitization, and then all the other businesses that are moving away from what was 100% cloud to hybrid cloud. We now need to have some of those technicians and the staff and the engineers and the people that want to aspire to become senior leaders in marketing and senior leaders in as a general operations or technical roles to start somewhere, and this is a perfect time to work your way through it. So I don't know if I answered it too much detail, but essentially, there is a role fit for everyone. Just depends on where you want to start. Sometimes you've got to start at the bottom, but in the DC industry, it doesn't take long for you to go to the top because we're growing that quickly.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Not only are there a number of roles that they could potentially step into on an entry-level basis, but it could be something related to IT. It could be facilities related. It could have something to do with construction, real estate, the capital markets side of it. There's a big portfolio company in the US that I see a lot of interns coming in and out this time of year from all of their offices in the US and in the UK. So there's a lot of different opportunities to step into depending on what they're interested in, what they're studying in school. And then imagine too the variety of roles and opportunities will depend too on just simply the size of the company. In a smaller startup company, they'll wear a ton of different hats. In a larger company, they'll probably be a lot more specialized. So
we're seeing a significant amount, and it's in a lot of the newspapers or online articles, that data centers are a very exciting time, and some of those articles are very old. And you think about it, it's like DC's been around for a long time, and the real estate play has been around even longer. Digital Realty and Equinix and others have been buying up sites and blocks of land to landlock for many years. So because it's now very much a public in your face and it's on radio and things like that for little snippets of 10-minute talks or things like that, it has more attraction and more awareness. I think that's something that's also grown the excitement around it. Is not just the DC industry and the internet's been around for, we'll call about 35 years. So there has to be some sort of base computer rooms or server farms of sorts for that time. It's gone from a market of multiple single megawatts to multiple hundreds of megawatts in that duration. It's very short, but it does exist, and I think that's what's got people excited around it as well.
So that's great advice for someone that's brand new to this industry, really early on in their career. What about someone that's more at your stage, where they walk into a conference and they look around and there's people that are a little bit younger, there's people a little bit later on in their career, but someone mid-career that maybe you knew in a former job that you work together, and they bump into you and say, Adam, I love this space, but it's been a struggle to keep my career going on track. What would you say to help them recharge the batteries and think about what their next move should be if they want to stay in digital infrastructure?
I had a conversation with someone not too long ago at ITW. That's a major conference. That one's we'll call it near Washington. Everyone sort of, it's in Maryland, but we'll call it in Washington, D.C. And you run into thousands of people. It's one of the larger events. And I've had this question asked before. You'd have to look at, where you currently stand. Are you in a smaller DC, and even I go down the path of telecommunications, those, carriers or telephone companies, as they used to be called, have little DCs. They might be getting out of those DCs by either selling them and getting them as an acquisition, or getting acquired by a DC company, or they're simply just shutting them down and turning them into a pure little telecommunications hub. You need to see what some of the skills that you've got, and work with, a conversation with a big player. In the US, you've got, obviously, DataBank are always looking for people. So jump on LinkedIn, and there's a couple of people I can recommend. I won't mention their names on this, but I'm happy to reach out, or if you reach out and say, who should I talk to? There's some key people that are on LinkedIn every day posting up, we need a job in such and such a county or such and such a state in the US. Same goes in Singapore. There's quite a few people because that's another major hub for Asia Pacific. In Europe, it's a little bit different because you've got the German markets, the Dutch markets, the English market being the UK, got a little part of Ireland as well. Then you've got other places like Brazil's going, absolutely astronomical. Spain is growing. Italy is massive now because it's got some new epicenters coming along, or that's what I call them, the facilities that are bigger than just a standard 1 or 2 or 10 megawatts at 50, 80, 100 megawatts. So each region has some key drivers, some key DCs that are going into it. So having an idea of what you want to go into, there's some key people on LinkedIn, as I said, that are always looking. That's where I sort of go to and go, if you want this particular role, follow this person, connect with this person. They're more than willing to do that. There are also some amazing recruiters out there. There's a particular recruiter I know, Andy Davis. I see him a lot. I've been on his, I was one of his first, I think, maybe top 5 or 10, speakers at his podcast he created a couple of years ago. His focus is all about the DC, world and recruiting top talent for that. There's also Reese out of Singapore, and there's quite a few in the US as well. So looking after those particular people, because they have a better knowledge of more than just the one site. They look at many different sites, and they have access to AI companies that are building a DC or buying capacity inside one, which is obviously the hot topic at the moment. AI is such a major driver. Then you've got the cloud. So the hyperscalers, the OTTs, as other words as they call it, they're looking for particular roles. They don't necessarily post online heavily on their LinkedIn with the recruiter because they get smashed with thousands of applicants. What they do is they pass it to a special recruiter who focuses on the DC industry. There's quite a few here in Australia that I've worked that do, acquire people to bring them into the region. So from, I won't say New Zealand because New Zealand's now growing that market and people are moving from Australia to New Zealand. But when the market was, we need some construction teams, they knew that they could pull it from a different country into Australia. And that's happening a lot in Europe and has done so for many years. So those recruiters are able to rinse and repeat because they've got a strong relationship with the businesses themselves, but they also have an understanding of where you could be fit into that area, but they also have multiple DCs. I would support, and if I know you well enough or have an idea of what skill sets you have, I'm more than happy to do some personal intros as well. These DCs reach out sometimes on a daily basis, but more often not on a fortnightly or monthly basis, just to check in. There was a conversation I had, and I had to do a quick sum. I talk to around 2,000 different DCs a year. Now, that's from players who are CEOs of the DCs through to just a small 20, 30, 50 rack facility in the middle of insert country or town. So, there's always a way of which I can say, hey, I've seen this, I've heard this. You do have someone who's interested to do this. Even if they don't have a job that's been posted or broadcasted, they are able to find a role for you in time. And I think that's something that's important is sometimes your perfect role may not be available today. It may take a week or two, and they sometimes have to do a full probity and procurement process. That's just a part of the big industry that we're in now is they want to make sure they hire the right person. It does take time to train you, even though you have the skills. So be mindful that it can take a couple of weeks and there's a process around it, but don't feel frazzled. I think that's something that has come to mind is I want a job now, I need a job now. If you have that desperation feeling, it's sometimes you jump at anything and it's not the right fit and you hop around, which is hard to sort of get your legs grounded, but also you jump in and it might take 6 months for you to go through some processes. And I know one of the hyperscale or the cloud providers I was trying to look at, they offered me a job and they said, do you want to go to Singapore or Sydney? Being a Brisbane-based person in Australia, I was like, I don't know if I want to move. After going through the first 2 rounds, they went, well, we can leave you in Brisbane, but it's a 6-month testing window before you then have to move. I wasn't even doing the particular works. It was all training and processing. And to me, I was going, I'm losing some of my skills by being in that role for 6 months, not even doing the job that they've asked me to do yet. So be mindful of that. There are processes to get to that point. It's just a matter of how comfortable you are and where you want to be. And you've got to think about a 3, a 5, and a 10-year plan. This industry, as I said, was rapidly growing. We don't know what we don't know, and we also don't know this industry and how it's playing out in some areas. So having a general skill set and then also a very particular, a small area of focus helps dramatically in this industry because you can pivot along the way. We look at Bitcoin mining and the cryptocurrency market. It's been very fluctuational, and that's been a part of the technology boom and bust, as it were. But transforming those, crypto mining DCs into AI DCs has been, a very almost instantaneous change, and people are excited for that. So be mindful that just because you're in an industry or in a department, you might not have a job tomorrow. Rest assured that, the DCs are growing, and sometimes you may work for a company and they may get acquired and they get into a bigger role. That's how I sort of want to make you understand, the different world that we're in. There is a job for you. It's just a matter of how comfortable do you feel in doing it, and do you feel like working for a bigger company or shifting across. Titles aren't everything. That's something I've learned in this industry. You can become a GM, you can just become a director, or you can become an AVP and still be a leader, still be able to direct and support and be in that particular path because they're in a niche area. You're focusing on a sector of the larger business. They don't even have a team of 1 or a team of 2 or a team of 3, but a very pinnacle to the business itself. And that's something that's important in how we sort of work in the DC space.
Yeah, Adam, you raised a really interesting point when you were talking about that place in your career where you're deciding to move to Sydney or Singapore, and it sounds like neither was really the preferred option. So much of SaaS and tech, especially over the last couple of years, has given people the flexibility for remote or hybrid arrangements. When you're looking at like data center operator, though, you're either physically working on site full time or just a lot of travel. There may be some pockets, right? Like within the ecosystem that sometimes sells to or partners with data centers where there's more flexible, but it's still very location dependent, right?
Yeah, so from an operational perspective, and that's sort of one of my key areas that I get excited for and do a lot of support in is we have a building or we have a floor or a space. How do we optimize that operationally? That's the staff, that's the mechanical, it's the electrical, that's the the cross connects, the ticketing system. The list goes on around all that fun and games. But you're exactly right, Joshua. The whole premise of if you're an operational person and you're running that particular site, you have to be in that area to support that site. And if you're running multiple sites, you have to be within their main regions to do so. look at the US. Sometimes the head offices are in, and they're moving around more and more. But New York and LA, now see some that are in Denver. Sometimes they have a head office, but not a facility there. Doesn't mean that you have to be in the head office, but you have to be close proximity to the facility. And that's something I've found is in other areas, I've got teams that are literally all around the world, and they support the Australian business, but they're not based in Australia. That's okay. It's a time zone problem to have, not a location problem to have. Be mindful that you are taking calls very early, sometimes earlier than 7 a.m., sometimes very late. And that's a part of the role as well. We're facing a 9 to 5 in the DC world. Unless you're in a particular area of administration, let's call it. So, the legal, generally speaking, has a window because it's much easier to be focused in and work through that time zone. The finance, not saying that they all don't work crazy hours, they all do, but generally speaking, they're more blockable as opposed to a 24-hour operation like, the DC world and the network operation centers and the secure operation centers and things like that. So having, a larger bandwidth means that you can work multiple hours or, beyond your normal, the standard, what we've known as the 9 to 5, which I don't think is standard anymore. I think everyone that seems to work from home, I start at 7, finish at 7 most days and nights. So, the conventional timing is out the window, providing that you can pick up children, you can pick up, the groceries and do some things, that you would normally do in those times that you normally try and not work. You can work from home and continue doing that.
Yeah, I've even noticed in the last couple of years, it used to be 10 years ago that being available a couple of evenings a week covered the full US. Like I'm on the East Coast of the US, so work late on like a Tuesday or Thursday evening, and you have plenty of time to meet with clients that are on the US West Coast. Now that we're so globalized, and I'm taking meetings all day long throughout Europe and throughout APAC and everything, there's no concept of what standard hours work anymore if you're truly. So it's just something people need to be realistic about and get used to with staffing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we've seen, as these DCs are getting acquired by, you just mentioned before, big financial companies, all the interns are going, I've got a brand new idea, let's buy into DCs. And everyone's like, we've all heard this before, but they find a small DC, whether it be in Boise or Arkansas or Oklahoma in the US or, places like Estonia. I had a customer who's got some racks in Estonia, of all places in the world, and in Eastern Europe. Why Estonia? But they're getting looked up. So we're seeing more and more of these pockets that are being sort of, they're little nuggets of gold that are being dug up and found that they have potential. So there's so much more financial reviews to go through, and so that adds a time zone complexity for some.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.
Well, it's interesting too about some of these locations that may not have been that prominent 5 or 10 years ago is there's a couple things that they bring. Because of location, they're able to solve latency challenges. And in some cases too, they're bringing massive amounts of untapped grid capacity that just don't exist in bigger metropolitan areas.
Absolutely. I think that's something that, we spoke about it previously, and your great segue to this, Joshua, is the demand. We know that DCs have been a focus in a metro, we'll call it a greater metro, things like that over the last couple of years due to latent sensitive infrastructure or, particular, providers going, I need to be within X amount of milliseconds to and from these locations. That's been fantastic. It's been successful. However, you just can't buy a building with 100 megawatts in downtown somewhere anymore. It doesn't exist. So they have to go further afield. So the latency conversation is becoming more and more of it'd be great that you're under a percentage higher, or it's not even broached upon full well knowing that when they build a site that's much bigger, a few miles or a few kilometers down the road, they will shift the less sensitive information to that, and that sensitive information stays within that sort of perimeter. But along with the presence of moving that infrastructure to a different region comes taxation benefits, which we've seen that supports, that development of construction. It promotes the ability for staff to move into that sector. We've spoken about that a lot in this podcast. But then also you have the idea of other technology sectors. If a cloud provider was to deploy 5, 10, 15 megawatts as a test case into that region, it then gets excitement that other cloud providers might do the same. Not all cloud providers have the same infrastructure. A Microsoft and a Google and Amazon, whilst they still provide we'll call it a cloud-based service, some sort of virtualization. Some have a specialty relationship with a backup service or a storage service. Some particular partners are exclusive with them. Others like to do multi. So when you normally have one cloud provider, be rest assured there'll probably be a second and probably a third, maybe even a fourth now coming through sooner rather than later, which means that the industries that are supportive of it, the IT sectors, the legal sectors, the accounting sectors, as I mentioned before, rely upon those cloud services, the web-based applications to access them. So if you're now going down a path, and I mentioned sovereignty early on, which is a key area of why the expansion is so heavily adopted, they want to keep all their data inside, their own boundaries, their own perimeters, their own country codes. So by having the cloud providers moving into that region itself, the data is being moved around. And you look at Poland as an example. Poland's just had a cloud adoption from Microsoft and others growing in there. That's public knowledge. They have seen that people from Amsterdam and from Germany who have who are Poland or Polish residents, that Polish data and that Poland information is being shifted back into the region because it now has an availability zone, is what they call it, moving it from a Dutch availability zone or a German availability zone into Poland itself. So we're seeing that shift, which means that it keeps the local economies going because they're supporting that region, helps with taxation, helps with the whole premise of why DCs are important. They're not a massive staff count as much as we're growing it out and the staff count's increasing. A DC doesn't necessarily hold hundreds of staff like others do. A cloud company will, and then the supporting businesses around it also do that. DCs are an enabler. That's what helps the businesses, get sticky to those regions. Companies like Megaport and the other network and service providers do the exact same thing. Cloud on-ramps and other processes bring attention to that region. I mentioned Estonia before. They're working through ways to get cloud adoption. First and foremost, they'd love to get a very large cloud provider to go in there. First, and how do you do that? You bring a cloud on-ramp to that to bring them in, draw the attention so that you can get accessibility there, which means that the staff who are owning IT companies, don't move away. They stay in their own region. They stay with their families. They kept the whole economics around, the circle of life, so to speak, keep that moving. So capacity is key around that. We're seeing things like nuclear. Renewables have been around for a long time, but hydrogen also something that's come through over the last couple of months. I've done a tour of a hydrogen site, or powered hydrogen site, that is, to support some infrastructure. Those two areas which I support being, how do we get megawatts without, burning a lot of fossil fuels to create that is a problem, and that becomes a very long and downward spiral conversation that can be done for hours. But essentially, people want to build hundreds of megawatts. There's a powerhouse data center in the US. It's building an 800 megawatt site. That is not a small feat. That's a significant amount of skills to do that in construction and engineering, not to mention the vendors. They're rubbing their hands going, we've got a big site to support here with the generators and the cabling, not to mention the square feet in Imperial world, or square meters in the metric world of actual white space to put these racks in. How do we do that? How does it work? Many conversations around it, but essentially capacity is key. People want large amounts of demand because the AI is pushing that. People want to create some of their workloads and get some different results. there's ways in which that, draftsmen and others, scientific researchers and things like that go, this used to take 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, or even just simply, a processing model might take 4 or 5 days or a week to render a building. It can be done in multiple hours if we put it into some sort of large, GPU that's a word that people use, the graphic processing unit, from the AI perspective, put that into that particular, device or cluster or pod or whatever word you want to use. Essentially, you're putting into an AI stack. So having an AI stack locally accessible to you, is helping the company grow and get more efficient. But that equals megawatts, which means where do you find those megawatts, which then equals where's the building going to be at? Do they have enough space? Singapore is, we'll call it stuck. They were having issues getting more power in. They've relaxed some of it, but people are still hesitant because it's not enough. So they're going to other places. So we're seeing that regions now go, hey, we've got an abundance of power. We're having to support. Even certain states are willing doing taxation relaxations because they're going, we can, do an offset to grow in that area. There's many different ways that, these regions are growing to support the industry. It's just it's a weird world that we're in. And who would have thought that, data centers are sexy? Personally, I do. I got a hashtag for it, but not everyone does. And I think that's something that, they're a buzzword, and they will be a buzzword for a little bit longer because they're an enabler. They're a founding digital infrastructure partner in the world that we have, which is AI, cloud, emailing, all the simple things for your TikToks and your Snapchats and all the things that kids are playing and using and leveraging. Children have iPads. I didn't think as a student, 20 odd years ago, that I'd be having an iPad as a part of my day to day. We had a computer, that was all well and good, but having a portable device, in your backpack to do certain things, all that information has to be stored for a period of time. So just growing, it has to be stored somewhere. I think that's sort of what we're seeing, Joshua, is the whole transformation of increased demand and therefore finding new blocks of land.
What's interesting, too, is I hear from people talking about the benefits of decentralized data centers as opposed to large hyperscale data centers. And I hear people talk about edge. So the question is everything going to be growing at a rapid clip, or are there going to be more winners and certain less favorable footprints for all these data center sizes going forward?
It's interesting. There's so many different words, like what is edge? Define edge. If you're a hyperscaler, edge is 10 megawatts, 5 megawatts. That's not really edge in some minds. Some minds they go, oh, edge is 10 racks, and it's in a more regional location. And I use the US. You don't put a 10 megawatt edge deployment in Alaska. Alaska is a very remote location with limited telecommunications. It's a small 50 rack site, and that sort of edge, and that's very, 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 very large edge. What we're seeing is that it's applicable to the different parts of the world. Conversation with providers go, we believe this is, a focus point. We want to focus on this. Therefore, we define it as whatever that is. There's a growth for that area. So there's always going to be winners and losers. And as much as I hate saying those two words, they don't, everyone's a winner. It's just who's more successful, or what is the demand that's focusing on that area that they're in. Sometimes you, as I said to my parents, I was in the right industry but born in the wrong state. That's just how I am. With my love and passion for data centers, they're not based in my local town. So as much as they are in other regions, and same with people who live in other areas. Colorado's got some great places as a state, but if you were in LA, or you're in, someone on the other side of Miami, that's growing, but not as much as New York. So everyone has an issue of you weren't necessarily localized in a DC hub. But what we are seeing is that those areas that aren't necessarily predominant being a tier 1, but now becoming a tier 2 market or a tier 3 market. In those markets, because of the conversation we just had with demand, with capacity and availability and the success, because they want to see growth in that area as well, becoming prominent and becoming more dominating because they're new and early adopting. Which means that when you're building a site, 20 odd years ago when they were building sites, and because those tier 1s have got a bit of history as well, they've been around for a lot longer, they were hard to build a greenfield site. Look at New York is a prime example. 60 Hudson, a beautiful building, it's got a lot of rich history around the telecommunications sector. Very much supportive of it. Been through it. The guys are amazing. But you can't knock it down and build 100 megawatts on that block of land because that building is such an old historical presence. It's very hard to do that in the heart of New York or places like that. So in a tier 2 location where they go, we're not as old as that. We don't have heritage listings. We don't have a different infrastructure that changes the way we do things. We can put 100 megawatts in a particular area. You're building a greenfield, location, or a very, very easy brownfield retrofit. So we're now seeing that demand grow. So the support around that has changed heavily. That's what sort of seeing now is that the demand has grown in a region, whether you call it edge, far edge, near edge, hyperscale, DC, whatever you want to call it, nodes. Everyone's becoming more successful because there is a demand for it. And that's the whole premise of this, Joshua, is the capacity is there, the growth is there. People want to see that and support that. And, if I had a few billion lying around, I'd build a few DCs right now in some locations. I mean, I would have done admittedly probably a year or two ago because the demand is very high and there's less capacity around. So if you can do that, there's some companies I'm working with and know that are growing their footprint and trying to do as quick as they possibly can because the demand is such high, has never been higher, and it's such a high right now to ride in to get into the industry.
When you think about where we are right now and what you anticipate is going to happen in the near future, if you look out maybe 2, 3, 4 years into your daily, weekly, monthly routines with the work that you do with clients on like design build projects and quantum computing, how do you envision what you spend your time on changing, or do you think it's going to be relatively similar over the next 2, 3, 4 years?
Look, I think the DC industry hasn't changed in some ways that it's generally speaking, bricks and mortar site. The customers have changed from the capacity demands, and they have definitely changed from the allocation of where they're putting their equipment. I see quantum is becoming an exciting part of the world. It's been around for a while. The military seem to use certain things before we'll call the public eye get it. But the real brains trust being the researchers and the super crazy physicists that have got some mind-blowing ideas use quantum and have done so for many years. It's becoming more of a known product, and the large players that are around, I throw NEC and IBM, the two people that have been, those two companies have been around for a long time in the IT profession. They've been supporting quantum for a little bit. So they have been, pushing that in. So along with AI, and as I mentioned, the crypto miners and AI shift does apply. The whole premise of way things are moving, we're going to be a part of the world. It's not going to change in some aspects, but it's also going to grow. I don't think, as a whole, these operations and design works and things like that are always going to be strong because people are going to do it. And we are going to see the shift of your site's been active and running for 15 or 20 years or even 25 years. How do you re-engineer it to make it more, compatible with gone are the days of 3 to 5, maybe 10 kilowatts a rack to, how do you make it a 20, 30, 40 kilowatt rack? Have you got some pockets of power and space with cooling that we could, transform this area into something that's a little bit more unique? The joys of, if you've got a little bit more power in the building, you could do the direct liquid chip. We could do the submersible racks, whether it be horizontal or vertical. The what do I call it? Rear door heat exchangers has come to my head. That type of cooling application where you don't have to rely on air cooling anymore because the demand's there. So by building a site that was predominantly air cooled, that was also using water pipes for their cooling applications, you can convert that to some sort of higher density solution without even doing major construction. That's something that's unique, and that's what we're seeing and see more of over time from that perspective. It's a unique proposition to have. Those older sites actually becoming more important again because of the way they've had their original cooling infrastructure design. So I think over the next couple of years, there will be a shift, but it won't be major just because the demand is still there. We're lagging in this industry because we don't have enough infrastructure and capacity. So we will see, some industries, flourish because of it. We'll see some areas that become more refined. I think that's something that's amazing in the DC space. The application for monitoring and ticket systems and the AI focus around is your capacity going and things like that, that's becoming more prevalent, and we're seeing that being pushed in the operational space, which is helping the customers and the cost effectiveness of those facilities. So putting them into older sites, I think that's where we'll see the next couple of years come through for sure.
So it sounds like for sure a period of change, a lot of retrofitting existing facilities, a lot of demand shifting around depending on the nature of how rapidly utility power is addressed, how rapid the advances are in some of the hardware and the chips and capital structure to make all of this happen. Definitely a period of time of rapid change.
Yeah, look, there's always going to be an adventure. I think that's what I think we need to come down to. Everyone's going to have, who's in the space is going to be on a roller coaster ride. That's for sure.
That is awesome. Adam, this has been super fascinating. A really great look at what's going on with data center related careers, some of the challenges around energy and latency, which oftentimes aren't really discussed together. But if you think about a lot of the issues that drive energy consumption have to do with trying to solve latency types of issues. And then we were just talking about where you see the future going with quantum computing investments with some of the biggest, most recognizable IT incumbents that have been around for generations, and how this will likely change in the next 2, 3, 4 years. Really, really super helpful. If someone wants to follow what you're working on or reach out or get in touch, what's the best way for them to reach you? Is LinkedIn a great place for that?
Yeah, I don't have any other social media. I was a big Facebook and Instagram and all the cool things as you were when you were younger. Makes me feel really old. But I used to have those extra social media platforms, and it didn't really show. I didn't really necessarily take a photo of inside a DC or talk about some of the partnerships and things that we're doing on Facebook or anything like that. So that's been my world for a long time. So I went to LinkedIn as my predominant social media and connection guidance. So follow me on LinkedIn. I post, I'm going to say semi-regularly, at least once a week, about somewhere I've been, some people what I'm working with, projects that are going on. DCs are fascinating. If the industry got shut down tomorrow, I'd be out of a job and I'd be very upset because that's all I know. It's all I love. And, it's an amazing place to be in. We're very fortunate that the foundations to the world now, as I said to someone, the internet is a utility that you rely on when you move into a house. That's a key piece. People think about it used to be telephone. It's converted a little bit more to a digital platform with internet. But, if you've got power and gas and water and you have an internet, everything else can be sorted out. You can have a shower, you can cook some food, you've got the ability to run your life, and then obviously you got internet because you can work from home, you can call your friends, you can ring the people to sort out anything else you need to. And I think that's something that's important that people have to understand. That's all backboned by fiber optic network, which then goes into a DC. That's something that's very exciting. So we're in for a roller coaster ride. People who've just started, hang on, it's not going to slow down. People that have been in it, have ridden the journey up and down and moved around. And there's some people that are absolute legends in this industry that have been here for many, many years, and some being longer than I have, and went, we're a part of this and we're sticking to it. And it's gone faster and it's gone slower, but we're all here for it and we love it. So DC's, the whole go-to-market has changed. The whole premise of, building, designing smaller sites has changed. It's sometimes old is new again. It's not just in fashion; it's also in DCs. We're seeing this whole world of digital infrastructure. It's exciting.
If someone wants to learn a little bit more about Megaport or learn a little bit more about techvox, what's the best place for them to go?
Megaport's a Australian stock exchange or ASX company. It's on the public market. It's tradable. It's you can buy shares in it, stuff like that. They've got a wealth of knowledge on their websites about their network as a service platform. I do post about it. The CEO Michael Reed, he's an absolute legend. He posts heavily about it. There's a massive amount of team. There's many people that go, we're all for Megaport. It's a global recognized company. It's hitting DC goals week after week by enabling more and more sites. So more than happy to reach you about and talk about Megaport as a whole and what we can do to support your sites themselves. techvox goes hand in hand with that. It's been a consultancy business and using the DC knowledge that's been in my head for many years and now being written down into bits and pieces of books and on white papers and things like that. I'm more than happy to have a dual conversation going. You've got a facility. How old is it? What do you want to achieve? How do you want to do it? And using some of my connections and say, here's a person that can support you to get this moving. Megaport can help you from the connectivity to enable the cloud on ramps, the DC interconnection. Do you want some internet to add in that supports you because you don't have certain providers in there? It's very dovetails into together. So both obviously are on LinkedIn. They've got their own profiles and very strong in the marketing support. And Megaport, if you're at an event, run into a Megaporter, that has some excellent swag and definitely want to talk to you about their ability to support you as a founding digital infrastructure.
That's awesome. I've been speaking with Adam Gibson, who's the Vice President of Global Data Center Development at Megaport and the owner of techvox, a consulting firm specializing in quantum computing. Adam's based in Australia. Adam, thank you so much for joining me today on the Data Center Go-to-Market podcast. It's been super informative, really helpful and interesting.
No, thank you, Joshua. Thank you, everyone.
The Data Center Go-to-Market podcast is sponsored by DCSMI, elevating the role of sales, marketing, and go-to-market GTM professionals in the growth of the data center industry. To stay informed about upcoming episodes, make sure that you subscribe to the Data Center Sales and Marketing newsletter on the DCSMI website that can be found at www.dcsmi.com. Again, that URL is www.dcsmi.com.